What's up, guys? I'm back today. Today, we're going to be talking about some UFC fighters with the most overrated resumes. So maybe fans are like, man, this guy's the GOAT in his division, and his resume just isn't that strong, in my opinion. Maybe it's padded by title defenses. Maybe it's padded by undefeated records or just, I don't know, it's low levels of competition. Let's look into it. I'm going to piss a lot of people off, so get your popcorn ready. The first overrated legacy of today, Israel Adesanya. I've been saying it for a long time. A lot of the Izzy fans disagree and they hate it, but I think that Israel Adesanya's legacy is overrated. Listen, a 13-4 UFC record with 5 title defenses, right? That seems pretty good. Notable wins. He has 2 wins over Vettori and Whitaker. He beat Brad Tavares and Derek Brunson in his come up. He beat Kelvin Gastelum for the interim belt. He beat Yoel Romero. He destroyed Paulo Costa, beat Jared Cannonier, and then he KO'd Alex Pereira. Pretty good legacy, right? But let's talk about why it's overrated. First of all, Izzy is always regarded to as one of the best strikers in the UFC. Like, man, if you don't have Izzy in your top 3, you're crazy. Dude, listen, Israel Adesanya is a great striker. He's not one of the best in the UFC. I'm sorry. I can't put him up there whenever he's been outstruck by guys like Alex Pereira. Fair enough, Alex Pereira is amazing, but he's been outstruck. He got outjabbed by Robert Whitaker in their rematch. He got outstruck in moments by Kelvin Gastelum. He got outstruck completely by Sean Strickland and embarrassed. He got outstruck by Jan Blachowicz. I get these are all great strikers, but people always act like Israel Adesanya is like the best striker in the world, and he's just not, dude. He's a great striker. I'm not saying he's not, but he's not one of the best in the world in terms of he's not top 5 in the UFC. He's just not in my eyes. He is one of the best in the world. So what am I saying? He's just not top 5 in the UFC, in my opinion. But back to his legacy. Listen, he arguably lost to Yoel Romero. I think he lost, but I don't think Yoel Romero deserved that win because as the challenger, I think you should take it from the champion. I'm one of those guys, but I do think Yoel Romero won that fight. I think on 100% on the criteria of the score we have today, he lost the rematch with Whitaker. I think Whitaker did more damage. I think Whitaker landed better strikes, and I think Whitaker controlled the action most of the fight. He lost to Jan Blachowicz, never moving up to double champ. People forget this. He moved up to light heavyweight and fought Jan Blachowicz, fair enough, who was probably in his prime at that point. He got outstruck and outgrappled that entire fight, and the commentators glazed Israel Adesanya that entire fight when he comfortably lost nearly every moment of the fight against Jan Blachowicz. And another thing to talk about is that most of Adesanya's wins weren't that dominant. Like, he coasted against Marvin Vettori in the rematch. He coasted against Jared Cannonier, coasted against Yoel Romero, fought Robert Whitaker decently in the second fight. It's like once Israel Adesanya became champion, outside of the Paulo Costa fight, he really just fought reserved and leg kicked at range for 5 rounds. And there's even videos of Adesanya putting fans to sleep in the stands. I'm not even making this up. Look it up in the Cannonier fight. People were leaving the fight early. So I always felt like Israel Adesanya's resume was overrated just because I feel like he lost a lot of the fights that on paper he won, which padded his UFC legacy to be better than it was, his 5 title defenses. Because listen, if he actually got a loss versus Yoel Romero and Robert Whitaker, he wouldn't have had 5 title defenses. How many would he have had? He would have had 2, maybe? 2 title defenses? So listen, Israel Adesanya, no doubt he's one of the greatest middleweights to ever do it, but for people that were talking about him passing up Anderson Silva and how, like, Izzy's the new GOAT of middleweight, like, no, dude, they need to calm down. Israel Adesanya, like I said, he's a great middleweight. I do think his legacy's overrated. He's an overrated striker, and his legacy's overrated for the fact that I think he lost some of these fights, and whenever he did win fights, he didn't win them impressively. He coasted and barely pitter-patted to each round to a 49-46 decision, or he just like didn't, in my opinion, he didn't go for it. And I get as a champion, like, they're supposed to take it from you, but I don't know. I've always felt like Adesanya just coasted, and coasting Izzy is not good Izzy. We need challenger Izzy. If it challenger Izzy fought every fight, who knows? Or Gyno Sonya Izzy. Either way, this is my thoughts on Israel Adesanya's legacy. I think it's a bit overrated. Just to clarify, overrated does not mean they weren't good. Israel Adesanya was an amazing middleweight champion. He's a good fighter. He's an amazing fighter. But what I'm saying is his legacy as it stands by the fans is overrated. That's what I'm saying. So don't come in the comments saying, dude, Izzy's good. Don't say he's not good. Izzy is amazing. His legacy is just overrated, my opinion. Let's move on to the second fighter on this list. Good grief. I am sick and tired of everyone calling Dominick Cruz the greatest bantamweight of all time or the bantamweight GOAT. He's not. Listen, Dominick Cruz has been sitting on his little high horse. The fans have been riding his coattails. Man, Dominick Cruz, man, you got to have him as the bantamweight GOAT. If you don't, you're just delusional. No, he's not the bantamweight GOAT. He's not my bantamweight GOAT. Merab Dvalishvili is my bantamweight GOAT. Let's look at Dominick Cruz's record in the UFC WEC, because he did fight in the WEC, which was acquired by the UFC. He had 14-4 record between the two with 6 total title defenses. His notable wins: Joseph Benavidez and Demetrious Johnson, known flyweights. So he beat 2 midgets, and he never finished anybody. Let's not forget that. Dominick Cruz, the decisionator, that should be his name. He has 2 wins over Faber, both decisions. He was also finished by Faber way back in the day, his first professional loss. He won a split decision against TJ Dillashaw in 2016. And people act like he dominated that fight. Man, Dominick Cruz is back. He destroyed TJ Dillashaw. No, he barely beat TJ Dillashaw. That fight could have went to TJ. I do think Cruz won. And then he beat Pedro Munoz later in his career. Now listen, Dominick Cruz, once his style was figured out, he was never the same. He was KO'd by Marlon Vera in the 4th round. Fair enough, he was piecing up Vera, but he was KO'd nonetheless, broke his nose. He was KO'd by Cejudo, fair enough, off the couch. But let's not talk about this. People were talking about Dominick Cruz is washed whenever he fought Cody Garbrandt. And he was destroyed. Dude, he was 31 years old. Dominick Cruz was not washed whenever he fought Cody Garbrandt. He was in the prime of his career, and he got embarrassed by Cody Garbrandt. I do think that fight was a lot closer than people give it credit for, but he still got dominated and flexed on by Cody Garbrandt. He has 0 finishing ability, and if you look at his string of wins, I know TJ Dillashaw and Demetrious Johnson are good wins, but listen, he barely beat TJ Dillashaw, and Demetrious Johnson, that was whenever Demetrious Johnson was a tadpole in like 2012, 2011, before Demetrious Johnson was literally like a little kid on the playground. There's no way you can put too much weight into that win. And he was up a weight class at bantamweight. Dominick Cruz is way bigger than Demetrious Johnson. And of course, he won by a decision. He didn't finish him. If he finished Demetrious Johnson, and maybe I wouldn't be saying this, but I think Dominick Cruz, by the fans, the whole narrative of, oh man, you got to have Dominick Cruz as the bantamweight GOAT. I don't see any other way. No, you don't. I don't. And I don't think people should. I think his bantamweight GOAT status, before people like Merab and Aljo and maybe even Cejudo came around, I do think you could have called Dominick Cruz the bantamweight GOAT. But right now, I think Merab Dvalishvili, despite having 0 title defenses, is the bantamweight GOAT just for his strength of schedule. He's beaten Piotr Jan. He's beaten Sean O'Malley. He's beaten just a bunch of up-and-coming guys and champions Merab Dvalishvili has beaten. So I don't think you can put Dominick Cruz as the bantamweight GOAT anymore. I'm sick of the nonsense like, oh, you have to have him as the bantamweight GOAT. No, you don't. And I don't. Respect to Dominick Cruz. He's a legend in this game. He's still an amazing fighter. But in my opinion, he never evolved as a fighter. He kind of just kept the same style. No submission threat, no knockout threat. And just had the little same like footwork, fancy schmancy movement around the octagon. But nonetheless, his legacy's overrated just for the simple fact that everybody says he's the bantamweight GOAT, and I don't think he is. Let's move on to the next overrated resume in the UFC, Henry Cejudo, the fraud himself. Now, let me start off by saying the single reason that Henry Cejudo has an overrated legacy is because of that fucking gold medal he got in the Olympics. If Henry Cejudo didn't have that stupid-ass gold medal, he probably would have a properly rated legacy. But this guy's going around and people are calling him one of the greatest combat sports athletes of all time, triple C, quadruple C. Remember whenever they were talking about Henry Cejudo going up to fight Volk at featherweight? Dude, Volk would have did illegal things to Cejudo. Let me just say that. But listen, Henry Cejudo had a UFC record of 10-4. His notable wins, not that impressive. Sergio Pettis, okay, decent win. Demetrious Johnson, good win, one of the greatest flyweights of all time. No, the greatest flyweight of all time. A good win nonetheless, but I thought it was a robbery. TJ Dillashaw down a weight class. Fair enough, he was on roids, but TJ Dillashaw was literally a shell of himself, and he clearly was out of there in 32 seconds. So fair enough. Marlon Moraes, clean win by Henry Cejudo. No excuses there. He went up to 135, and he destroyed Marlon Moraes, who was on a win streak at the time. Fair enough. Dominick Cruz off the couch. This win, the one where Keith Peterson smelled like alcohol and cigarettes, I don't think you can put too much weight into this win, in my opinion, just for the simple fact that it was Cruz off the couch, and then Cejudo retired after that. So I think Cejudo has an overrated legacy just because of the whole, like, greatest combat sports athlete of all time thing, triple C. Like, yeah, don't get me wrong, winning an Olympic gold medal is a once-in-a-lifetime thing, but we're not talking about Olympic gold medals. We're talking about UFC legacies. And Henry Cejudo, I don't care if he's a flyweight, bantamweight champ. He's probably the worst double champ there is. He's overrated, and his legacy's overrated. Don't get me wrong. Karate Stance Cejudo is a different beast, but he was destroyed by Demetrious Johnson in their first fight. Destroyed. Demetrious Johnson hit him with knees to the body and finished him on the ground. It was amazing to see. And then the rematch was a robbery, in my opinion. Beating off the couch Cruz. And then, like I said, he's overrated due to his Olympic gold medal. Let's stop pretending like Henry Cejudo is one of the best bantamweights in the world right now. He's not. He's 5'4", and if he fights Sean O'Malley or anybody in the division, he'll probably get slept. He's also almost 38 years old. Either way, Prime Cejudo was good. He's just a little overrated due to the whole Triple C gold medal thing. Let's move on to the fourth overrated legacy on this list. Not they're in no particular order, but Khabib Nurmagomedov. Now listen, I think that Khabib Nurmagomedov has one of the most overrated legacies, and let me explain why. I think the whole 29-0 thing, people put a lot of weight into that just because the simple fact that it's really hard to go undefeated in MMA. Fair enough. 29-0, who else does that? John Jones, he lost to Dominick Cruz. Fair enough. Khabib Nurmagomedov, undefeated, retired as a champion. Not many UFC fighters can say that. But let's talk about his pre-UFC record, which is known to have 2-round fights that were sanctioned as pro fights, giving him a padded record. And he was fighting opponents pre-UFC that had like 1-5 records, 2-10 records. Like he was fighting extremely garbage competition pre-UFC and pretty much got a free 16-0 record before he got to the UFC. And fair enough, he came into the UFC and he did his thing and he didn't lose. Some people think he lost to Gleison Tebow, but he won that fight. On paper, I think he won. But the problem with Khabib's legacy is that he retired too early with only 3 title defenses, and people are going around talking about, man, Khabib, you got to have him as your lightweight GOAT. Undefeated, never bled in the octagon, barely lost a round. Like, I get all that is true, but the strength of schedule is just not there for me when you look at people like Islam Makhachev. Khabib beat RDA way back in the day. He destroyed Michael Johnson. He went to a decision with Edson Barboza. I get he dominated him, but he should have finished Barboza. A striker and versus a grappler like Khabib, he should have finished that fight. He beat Ali Aquinta on 1 day's notice for the belt. Not the best win to get the belt. And he fought to a 5-round decision with him. He should have finished Ali Aquinta too, in my opinion. Fair enough. The end of his career was legendary. He finished Conor, Dustin Poirier, and Justin Gaethje back to back to back, all by submission. And then he retired. So I'm not saying Khabib Nurmagomedov is not one of the lightweight greats, and he's not an all-time great in the UFC. I just don't think he's not in my top 5. And I think people talk about Khabib like he's like the greatest UFC fighter to ever exist. And he's just not. His resume is not strong enough. His pre-UFC record is extremely padded, fighting bad competition and just not the best guys. It's well documented. Look it up, do the research. His pre-UFC record is not what it seems to be. And I think his undefeated record really carries his legacy. That 29-0, people really like, man, Khabib was undefeated. Like, how do you not have him as your number 1 lightweight GOAT? Well, first of all, Islam Makhachev is the lightweight GOAT, in my opinion. He has a longer win streak than Khabib at 14. He has more. When he beats Arman Saruki in January, he'll have more title defenses, but right now he has the same amount. Islam has a stronger strength of schedule, in my opinion, beating better opponents. He has more finishes. He's more well-rounded. And people always bring up the argument, well, in a hypothetical fight, Khabib would beat Islam. And that might be true, but we're talking about well-roundedness. We're talking about resumes. We're talking about title defenses, longest win streaks, and Islam clears over Khabib in all those areas. So I think what makes Khabib Nurmagomedov's legacy overrated is first and foremost is the fans, and the fact that he's 29-0, that really carries his legacy. He was dominant, yes, but his opponents just weren't the strongest. He didn't fight any good grapplers that can give him resistance. Look at his last opponents. Dustin Poirier, known to struggle against grapplers. Justin Gaethje, a white belt on the mat. Conor McGregor, known to struggle against grapplers. Submitted by Nate Diaz, of all people. Ali Aquinta couldn't even barely take him down and won by a decision. Edson Barboza couldn't finish him. Fair enough, he destroyed Michael Johnson, but Michael Johnson doesn't have good wrestling defense or good jiu-jitsu. And RDA, he just took him down over and over to a decision. So the problem I have with Khabib's legacy is that he didn't fight that fighter that's supposed to test him on the ground. He didn't fight a Charles Oliveira like Islam Makhachev did. He didn't. So for people to say, I just felt like Khabib needed more resistance. He needed to prove more in his career. He needed to fight around longer. He needed to fight that extremely dangerous grappler like a Charles Oliveira or extremely good wrestler that he's not going to be able to take down. And then we could have said, man, this guy's the best, but he retired too early. So like I said, in my opinion, an extremely overrated resume for Khabib Nurmagomedov. Let's move on to the last person on this list. We got Demetrious Johnson. Now, Demetrious Johnson's legacy is overrated, and I think his title defenses, more than anything, carry his legacy. That number 11 in title defenses is unheard of. But the problem with Demetrious Johnson having 11 title defenses is that his strength of schedule was garbage. Let's be real, guys. He was beating guys like Ray Borg and Wilson Hayes. Like, where the fuck is Wilson Hayes? He's retired now. Where's Ray Borg? He's not in the UFC anymore. Most of the guys that Demetrious Johnson beat aren't in the UFC anymore. Old man Tim Elliott. But let's talk about Demetrious Johnson. Notable wins. He has 2 wins over Joseph Benavidez. Fair enough. Benavidez was a good fighter. He has a win over Kyoji Horiguchi, and I think it was the latest submission in UFC history. 1 second of the fight in the 5th 5-round fight. He has a dominant win over Henry Cejudo. 2 wins over John Dodson, who was a dangerous flyweight at the time, and a win over Tim Elliott. All of his other wins, I don't think they're notable. I don't. Adriano Moraes won. Yeah, he's decent, but not. Like if if Adriano Moraes comes to the UFC, he does not become champion. He might be top 10, maybe, but he in the bantamweight division he would fight in. Nah, dude. Adriano Moraes in the bantamweight division in the UFC. Maybe he'd cut down the flyweight. I don't know, but he looks like a big bantamweight. Either way, I feel like Demetrious Johnson, skill for skill, is one of the best fighters to ever do it. But what holds his resume back, or what makes his resume overrated, is his strength of competition just isn't there. And people cling on to that 11 title defense thing really heavily. Like, man, DJ, you got to have him in your top 3 all-time greatest fighters. And honestly, for me, Demetrious Johnson is like number 8 or 9 on my list in GOATs. I don't know if I ever do a GOAT list because it's so subjective, but I think I have Demetrious Johnson at 8 or 9 in my greatest of all-time list. It's just, for me, that one of the things when you look at resumes, what makes a good resume is the competition you beat. I can't sit here and say, oh, man, he has 11 title defenses. He's the GOAT. Like, I just can't do that. Title defenses, to some degree, is impressive. It is hard to stay on top whenever everybody's coming for your head. But Demetrious Johnson's level of competition at flyweight, it doesn't do it enough to me. He'd have to have like 16 title defenses for me to get over the fact that his competition was low. I get it. He did what he was supposed to do. He destroyed the competition in front of him, but he should have went up to bantamweight and chased greatness. No, he stayed at flyweight. Fair enough. But the bantamweight division was better at the time. And fair enough, he's a small guy. Him going up to bantamweight would have been tough, but I feel like that could have solidified him as an even. Then maybe his legacy wouldn't be overrated by me. I don't know. Demetrious Johnson, don't get it twisted. He's one of the greatest mixed martial artists to ever do it. One of the most well-rounded fighters ever in terms of the striking, the jiu-jitsu, the wrestling, the power in his hands. Like, Demetrious Johnson had it all. But his legacy's overrated because of that 11 title defense number. People like to, man, Demetrious Johnson, he got the most title defenses in UFC history. Got to put him as one of your GOATs. Like, no, dude. The levels of competition do matter. They do, to some degree, matter. You can't just throw it out the window and be like, he has 11 title defenses, he's the GOAT. Like, in my opinion, you can't do that. I'm not trying to disrespect any of these fighters. I'm just saying, resume-wise, they're overrated. That's all I'm saying, guys. That's it for this video. Let me know what you think in the comments. I'm sure a lot of people are going to have an issue with Demetrious Johnson and the Izzy one specifically because they have a lot of glazers. Fair enough. Just to clarify, all of these fighters in this video are extremely good. They're some of the GOATs of the sport, but their resumes are just a tad bit or even a lot overrated, in my opinion. Leave a like if you enjoyed the video. Subscribe to the channel if you're new. And yeah, I post daily MMA content and I do streams here and there. So I appreciate all of you guys watching, and I'm out. Peace.